Okay, let's take a look at this problem. We got x to the third minus 3x squared minus 18x plus 40. And we're finding 0, so we always set it equal to 0. Now I'm going to show a few of these by hand. I'm going to show the general idea. If you look in the book, they give you some hints on what do you do if the signs are all positive, for example. So let's take a look at how to find all the possible rational zeros. Now whatever numbers at the end, we'll specify as p. Whatever numbers in the beginning, we specify as q. So this is assuming it's in standard form. So our constant term here at the end will be our p, and the coefficient in front of our leading term will be our q. So p is 40, and we're going to write down all the products that give us 40. Well, we got 1 times 40, we got 2 times 20, and let's try this again. There we go. Okay, so we got 1. I'll say it after I get done writing them down. I'm not very good at guessing spacing. Okay, we got 1 times 40 gives us 40. 2 times 20 gives us 40. 4 times 10 gives us 40. And 5 times 8 gives us 40. But even more than that, this is a positive 40. So you could have negative 1 times negative 40 gives you positive 40. So automatically we put plus or minuses before each one of these to handle our different sign cases. Now our q is 1. The only thing that'll give you 1 is 1 times 1, so I'm just going to simply put a 1. Okay, all of our possible rational zeros, we'll take each value of p and put it over q. I only need to put 1 plus or minus though. So 1 over 1, 2 over 1, 4 over 1, 5 over 1, 8 over 1, 10 over 1, 20 over 1, and 40 over 1. Which gives us 1, 2, 4, 5, 8, 10, 20, and 40, all with plus or minuses before. Now these are all our possible rational zeros, all our possible answers. What we'll do is we'll plug each one of those into synthetic division and see what happens. Okay, so I'm starting with all my coefficients. So I got 1, the number for the x to the third, the negative 3, the negative 18, then our constant term, the 40. So I'll add, multiply, add, multiply, add, multiply, add. We're looking for a 0 for the remainder. So that tells us that negative 1 is not one of our answers. So we go to the next possible rational 0, which is 1. I'm just going down the line here. So I got, let's see what we get. Add, multiply, add, multiply, add, multiply, add. And I still do not get 0. So 1 is not an answer. So then I'll plug in negative 2. Add, multiply, add, multiply, add, multiply, and add. Still we don't get it. Okay. Well, let's go to positive 2. So add, multiply, add, multiply, add, multiply, add, and we get a 0. When you get a 0 as your remainder, that means you found one of your answers. That's factor theorem. So our first answer is x equals 2. Now we're left with, once you find your first answer, or any answer, it takes it down 1 degree. So if this was x to the third to begin with, then this will be 1 degree lower, so it'll be x squared. Then this would be x, and this would be no x. So we're left with x squared minus x minus 20 equals 0. Now after it's a quadratic, that's when you can drop out of this process and use quadratic formula, factor, and solve it. Lots of different techniques. Now this one, a factor, x minus 5 times x plus 4. Okay, the zero factor property says you get 0 on one side, you factor the other side, you set each factor equals 0. So I'll set x minus 5 equal to 0, and I'll set x plus 4 equals 0. Which gives us x equals 5, and x equals negative 4. Now your largest power tells you how many answers you're going to have. So a degree, which was 3, tells us we're going to have 3 answers. Now they could all be the same, or you could have imaginary, but you're going to have 3 answers. Okay, let me clean up this page, and we'll look at another one. Okay, we got this one. 4x to the third minus 17x squared plus 16x minus 3 equals 0. This number at the end will be our p, number at the beginning will be our q. Now p is 3, so the only product to give us 3 is 1 times 3. Q, well, that's 1 times 4 and 2 times 2. So those would be our Q values. Now all of our possible answers are each value of P over Q. So I got 1 over 1, 1 over 2, 1 over 4. I got 3 over 1. I got 3 over 2. And I got 3 over 4. So we got 1, 1/2, 1/4, 3, 3/2, and 3/4. Okay, we'll start plugging them into synthetic division. I'll start with -1. So 4, -17, 16, and -3. Add, multiply, add, multiply, add, multiply. And assuming I add and subtract, or added and multiplied it correctly, that's a remainder which is not 0. So we keep going. So plug in 1. Add, multiply, add, multiply, add, multiply, and we get a 0. That 0 tells us that we found our first answer. So x equals 1 would be our first answer. Now at this point, we start out with x to the third. We're now down to x squared, x, and no x. So we've got 4x squared minus 13x plus 3 equals 0. And this factors as 4x minus 1 times x minus 3 equals 0. Zero factor property says you get 0 one side, you factor the other side, you see each factor goes 0. So I got 4x minus 1 equal to 0, and I got x minus 3 equals 0. So I solve this. 1 take -1 over becomes positive 1, divide both sides by 4, and we get 1/4. On this one, we'll take the -3 over, and it gives us a positive 3. Those would be our 3 answers. Remember, I said that the largest power, your degree, is going to tell you how many answers you're going to have. So we had 3 for a degree, so that means we're going to have 3 answers. Okay. Clear off this page, and we'll look at one I think that involves quadratic formula. I think this one's a quadratic formula problem. We got x to the third minus 4x squared plus 9x minus 10 equals 0. Number here at the end is our p. This is our q. So all products give me 10. This will be 1 times 10 and 2 times 5. So I'm going to have 1, 2, 5, and 10. All products give me 1. This is invisible 1 before the x to the third. That would be 1 times 1. So then all of our possible answers, take each value of p and put it over q. So 1 over 1, which is 1. 2 over 1, which is 2. 5 over 1, which is 5. And 10 over 1, which is 10. Okay, so let's start plugging in values. So we'll add, multiply, add, multiply, add. And at some point, when you realize it's not going to work, you don't need to go any further on that one. So let's try 1. So add, multiply, add, and that's not going to work. Next one is 2, or negative 2. So add, multiply, that's not going to work. 2. Okay. Add, multiply, add. We get a zeroth remainder. That means we found our first answer. So x equals 2. Now this was x to the third to begin with. Each answer we find takes it down 1 more degree, so this will be x squared, x, and no x. So we're left with x squared minus 2x plus 5 equal to 0. This will not factor, so I have to use quadratic formula. A is whatever's in front of our x squared, which is 1. B is whatever's in front of our x, which is negative 2. And C is our number at the end, which is 5. Quadratic formula says x equals negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. It's always a good idea, if you mess up on signs, to go through and replace all of your variables with parentheses before you plug in your numbers. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Now everything else is going to remain exactly as is. All I'm doing is replacing the variables with parentheses. Okay. Now b we said was negative 2. So everywhere I have b, I'll put in negative 2. A we said was 1. So everywhere I had an a, I'll put in 1. And c we said was 5. So everywhere I have a c, I'll put in 5. So we got 2 plus or minus. Negative 2 squared is 4 minus 4 times 1 times 5 is 20. All over 2. Which gives us 2 plus or minus square root of negative 16 over 2. We always simplify radicals no matter where we run across them. Negative 16 is negative 1 times 4 times 4. Now with square roots, we're looking for pairs of something. Here's a pair of 4s, so they're going to come out as a single 4. And remember, a negative 1 comes out of a square root as an I. So this is 2 plus or minus 4i over 2. Whenever you have an imaginary part appear in your problem, you want to split up the real part separate from the imaginary part. So I'll put the 2 over 2 plus or minus the 4 over 2 with an I to the side, which gives us 1 plus or minus 2i. Now we said there's going to be 3 answers. We found one real one. The plus or minus here accounts for our other 2 answers. So those are our 3 answers. Let me clear that off. And we'll look at one more. One that has more than one answer you can get through synthetic division. That one should work. Okay. So we got x to the fourth plus 5x to the third minus 5x squared minus 15x plus 14 equals 0. Okay. Well, our number to ends are p, number to begin is a q. All of prox give us 14. We got 1 times 14, 2 times 7. So I got 1, 2, 7, and 14. Q is 1. Only thing that gives you 1 is 1 times 1. So then, the p over q, I take each value of p, put it over q. So 1 over 1 is 1. 2 over 1 is 2. 7 over 1 is 7. And 14 over 1 is 14. Those are all of our possible answers. So we'll start going down through them, plugging in synthetic division. See which ones work. Okay, so I'll add, multiply, add, multiply, add, multiply. Let's see. Okay, that doesn't work. So let me plug in 1. At the point you see you're not going to get a remainder of 0, assuming you did your math right, it doesn't work. So plug in 1. Add, multiply, add, multiply, add, multiply, add. Okay, that looks promising. That tells us our first answer is x equals 1. Now this was x to the fourth, so now we're down to x to the third. Now, just because 1 worked the first time does not mean it won't work again. So you try 1 again. But you want to try it on the line you just found. You don't want to try it on the original line. It'll work all day long on that one. Okay, so the line we just found is one to work with now. Okay, so we'll add, multiply, add, multiply, add, multiply. That's not going to work. So now we're down to our next possible answer, the 2's. So I'll try negative 2. And again, we tried on the line we just found. Don't try it on the original one. Add, multiply, add, multiply, add, multiply. Assuming I did my math correct. Yeah, let's double check it. Okay, yeah, then that one worked, which means our second answer is x equals negative 2. Now, remember when we found this, it took us down to x to the third, so this is x to the third. So now we're down to x squared. Each answer you find takes it down one more power. This will be x, and this will be no x. So we're left with x squared plus 4x minus 7. And your goal is to get it down to the quadratic. If you can get it down to the quadratic, you can use another method to finish it. Well, this is a quadratic formula because it doesn't factor. A will be whatever's in front of our x squared, which is 1. B will be what's in front of our x, which is 4. And C will be our number at the end, which is negative 7. Quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So I'm going to put parentheses in everywhere I have a variable before I plug in my numbers. Okay, we said b was 4, so everywhere I had a b, I'll put in a 4. We said a was 1, so everywhere I have an a, I'll put in 1. We said c is negative 7, so everywhere I have a c, I'll put in negative 7. So we got negative 4 plus or minus 4 squared. Negative 4 times negative 4 times 1 is negative 4 times negative 7 is positive 28. So then we've got negative 4 plus or minus square root of 44 over 2. Always simplify your radicals at any step. 44 is 2 times 2 times 11. Now remember, we're looking for a pair of somethings. Here's a pair of 2's, so they'll come out of the square root as a single 2. So we got negative 4 plus or minus 2 squared 11 over 2. And remember, if you can divide this number, and this number by the same number, do so. Well, those are all divisible by 2. So that gives me negative 2 plus or minus 1 square root 11 over 1, or simply negative 2 plus or minus square root 11. And those would be our 4 answers. The plus or minus there accounts for our last 2 answers.